Marlo Pemberton was exactly what I'd expected. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She walked into my office with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her life. "Rowan Vance," she said, not offering her hand. "We need to talk." "I don't believe we have anything to discuss," I replied, not standing. "You received a full refund of your deposit. The contract has been fulfilled." "Cut the corporate talk," Marlo said, sitting down uninvited in one of my visitor chairs. "We both know what this is really about. Dashiell told me about the email." "Did he?" "Your mother and I made a mistake," Marlo said bluntly. "A significant mistake. We handled the situation poorly and we hurt you. I'm here to apologize for that." Of all the things I'd expected, genuine acknowledgement wasn't one of them. "Go on," I said carefully. "I was wrong," Marlo continued. "I let my mother's obsession with perfect photographs influence my judgment. She kept going on about the optics, the family image, how everything needed to be flawless for the society pages. And I listened to her instead of thinking about what was right. That email should never have been sent." "Yet it was," I pointed out. "Yes, it was, and I can't take that back, but I can apologize sincerely and try to make amends." She leaned forward. "Rowan, I know you don't know me well. We've only met a handful of times at family dinners. But I love your brother. He's kind and funny and makes me want to be a better person. And he's been miserable this past week, not just because the wedding is in chaos, but because he hurt his sister." "He had the opportunity to stand up for me," I said. "He chose not to." "You're right. He made a cowardly choice. We both did. And I can't change that." Marlo's voice was steady, her gaze direct. "But my grandmother is dying. She has maybe weeks left. My whole life, she's been my champion, the person who believed in me, who encouraged me to be myself instead of the perfect society daughter my parents wanted. She's the reason I became a teacher instead of following my father into real estate. She's the reason I have the courage to marry for love instead of family advantage." She paused, and I saw genuine emotion flicker across her composed face. "My grandmother asked to see my wedding," Marlo continued. "It's her dying wish, literally. Not because she cares about society or photographs or any of that nonsense. Because she wants to see me happy before she goes. And if this wedding doesn't happen next weekend, she won't be here to see it." I felt something soften in my chest, but I pushed it down. "That's emotional manipulation." "Maybe," Marlo agreed. "Or maybe it's just the truth. Look, I'm not asking you to forgive us. I'm not even asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to let 300 people have their celebration and to let a 97-year-old woman see her granddaughter get married before she dies." "And what do I get out of this arrangement?" I asked. Marlo straightened in her chair. "What do you want?" What did I want? I'd spent the past month driven by anger and hurt, focused on revenge. But sitting here now, looking at Dashiell's future wife being more honest with me than my own family had been, I realized revenge felt emptier than I'd expected. "I want an apology," I said slowly. "A public one, at the wedding. I want Dashiell and my mother to stand up in front of all 300 guests and acknowledge what they did." "Done," Marlo said immediately. "I'm not finished," I continued. "I also want a significant donation to the Burn Survivors Foundation. Say $100,000 in my name." "Done." "And I want you to understand something," I said, my voice harder now. "I'm not giving you the venue back out of the goodness of my heart. I'm doing it because the situation is more complicated than I initially understood, and because a dying woman doesn't deserve to be collateral damage in a family conflict. But that doesn't erase what was done to me." "I understand," Marlo said quietly. I pulled up my calendar. "The estate can be available next weekend, but only if the renovations are pushed back by 2 weeks. That costs me money and time. I want all of that compensated, another $50,000 on top of the original booking fee." "Agreed." "And I want changes to the photography plan," I added. "I will be in the family photos, all of them, front and center, scars visible, no photoshopping. If anyone has a problem with that, the deal is off." For the first time, Marlo smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The wedding took place on a brilliant Saturday afternoon, exactly as originally scheduled. The Meridian Estate looked magnificent. The gardens were in full bloom, the historic manor gleamed in the sunlight, and white chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing the rose-covered arbor where Dashiell and Marlowe would exchange vows. I arrived early, wearing a deep blue dress that I'd bought specifically for the occasion. It was elegant and sophisticated, and it complemented rather than hid the scars on my neck and shoulder. I'd considered covering them with makeup or a scarf, then decided against it. This was who I was now. My mother was waiting near the entrance, looking uncomfortable in her mother-of-the-groom dress. When she saw me, her expression flickered through several emotions: relief, guilt, apprehension, before settling on forced cheerfulness. "Rowan," she said, "I'm so glad you came." "Mother," I replied neutrally. "About that email," she began, then stopped. "We should talk after the ceremony." "Yes," I agreed. "We should, but not now." The ceremony was beautiful. Dashiell looked genuinely happy standing at the altar, and Marlowe was radiant as she walked down the aisle. I sat in the second row, my compromise position between complete exclusion and front and center, and watched my younger brother promise his life to someone who'd proven herself more honorable than I'd initially thought. When the officiant announced them as married and the guests applauded, I found myself clapping along, my complicated feelings settling into something like acceptance. The reception was held in the grand ballroom, with its hand-painted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. During the cocktail hour, Marlowe's grandmother, Theodora, was wheeled in by a nurse. She was tiny and frail, her skin paper-thin and her breathing labored, but her eyes were bright with joy. Marlowe knelt beside the wheelchair, and I watched as the elderly woman stroked her granddaughter's face with trembling hands, saying something too quiet for me to hear. Marlowe was crying, and so was Theodora, and I felt my own eyes begin to sting. This was why I'd agreed to give back the venue. Not because I'd forgiven my family, not yet, but because some things were bigger than revenge. After dinner, before the dancing started, Dashiell stood up and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted, 300 guests turning to face the head table. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Marlowe and I are overwhelmed by your love and support. Before we continue the celebration, there's something important I need to say." He paused, took a deep breath, and looked directly at me. "A few weeks ago, I did something I'm deeply ashamed of. My mother and I sent an email to my sister, Rowan, uninviting her from this wedding. We told her that her presence, specifically the scars on her face and neck, would negatively impact our photographs and make people uncomfortable." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people turned to look at me. I kept my expression neutral, my head high. "Those scars," Dashiell continued, his voice stronger now, "came from an act of incredible heroism. 2 years ago, Rowan pulled a little girl from a burning car, saving that child's life at great personal cost. She spent months in the hospital recovering, and instead of honoring her bravery, instead of being proud to call her my sister, I allowed her to be excluded from my wedding because of how she looks." My mother, sitting at the head table, had tears streaming down her face. "I was a coward," Dashiell said. "I prioritized appearances and social expectations over my own sister, and I'm standing here today in this beautiful venue, having this perfect wedding, only because Rowan showed me more grace than I deserved. She owned this property. She had every right to refuse to let us use it, but she made a choice to allow this celebration to happen anyway." He raised his glass toward me. "Rowan, I can't undo what I did. I can't erase the hurt I caused. But I can promise to be better, to be worthy of being called your brother. And I can say in front of everyone who matters to me that I am proud of you. Proud of your courage, your strength, and yes, proud of your scars, because they represent everything good about who you are." The room erupted in applause. People were standing, turning toward me, raising their glasses. I felt my carefully maintained composure begin to crack. Then my mother stood, her voice shaking as she added, "I owe my daughter an apology as well. I allowed my own superficial values to override what should have mattered, that my daughter is alive, that she saved a child's life, and that she deserves to be celebrated, not hidden away. Rowan, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I stood slowly, every eye in the room on me. I walked to the head table where Dashiell and my mother waited, both of them looking anxious and hopeful. I accept your apology, I said quietly, loud enough for only our family section to hear. But understanding that this changes nothing about the past, what you did hurt me deeply. It revealed how conditional your love and acceptance has been, and it's going to take time, a lot of time, to rebuild that trust. I understand, Dashiell said. We understand, my mother echoed. But, I continued, allowing a small smile, we can start today, right now. I hugged my brother, feeling his arms tighten around me as he whispered another apology into my ear. Then I turned to my mother, who was openly weeping now, and let her embrace me as well. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The rest of the wedding was genuinely enjoyable. I danced with Dashiell during the family dance, smiled for the photographer, front and center, scars visible, just as I demanded, and even had a pleasant conversation with Marlowe's mother, Felicity, who apologized for her role in the original email. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marlowe found me near the rose garden, where I was getting some air. Thank you, she said simply, for giving us this day. Thank your grandmother, I replied. She's the reason I changed my mind. Well, her and your honesty. You were the first person in my family to actually acknowledge what happened without making excuses. Marlowe nodded. Grandma Theodora told me something when I was planning this wedding. She said that how you treat people when they're vulnerable tells you everything about your character. I failed that test spectacularly, but I'm hoping I'll get another chance to prove I can be better. You're married to my brother now, I said. You'll have plenty of chances. She smiled at that, then pulled something from her clutch purse, a cream-colored envelope with my name written in elegant calligraphy. What's this? I asked, taking it. Open it later, Marlowe said. When you're ready, it's from Grandma Theodora. Before I could respond, she squeezed my hand and disappeared back into the ballroom, leaving me alone with the envelope. I tucked it into my own purse and stood there for a moment, looking at the Meridian Estate, my estate now, lit up against the darkening sky. The property really was beautiful, and despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and anger and revenge that had brought me here, I felt something shifting inside me. Maybe revenge wasn't as satisfying as I'd thought it would be. Or maybe the real satisfaction came from knowing I'd held all the power and chosen to use it wisely rather than cruelly. I drove home that night in contemplative silence, the envelope from Theodora sitting on my passenger seat. In my downtown loft, I changed out of my dress, made a cup of tea, and finally opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in shaky, spidery handwriting. Dear Rowan, we haven't met, but Marlowe has told me about you. About your bravery in saving that little girl, and about how your family failed you when they should have celebrated you. I'm 97 years old, and I've learned a few things in my long life. One of them is that families are imperfect collections of flawed people who sometimes do terrible things to each other. Another is that forgiveness isn't about erasing the hurt. It's about choosing not to let that hurt define your future. Your family made a grievous mistake, but you, my dear, made a choice to rise above it. You held the power to punish them, and instead, you chose grace. That takes a strength that most people never develop. I won't be here much longer. The doctors give me weeks at best. But I wanted to thank you for giving me the gift of seeing my granddaughter marry a good man in a beautiful ceremony. You didn't owe me that gift. You gave it anyway. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Keep being brave, Rowan. Keep being strong. And when you're ready, not today, maybe not this year, but someday, consider letting your family earn back your trust. People can change. People can grow. Give them the chance to prove it. With gratitude and admiration. Theodora Pemberton. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my carefully constructed walls crack a little more. This woman I'd never met, this dying stranger, had seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself, that my choice to give back the venue wasn't weakness or capitulation. It was strength. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, next to the original email from my mother that had started this whole situation. 2 letters, 2 very different messages about who I was and who I could choose to be. 3 weeks later, Quinlan knocked on my office door with an unusual expression. "Theodora Pemberton passed away this morning," they said quietly. "Marlo called. The funeral is on Friday." I sat back in my chair, feeling a weight settle in my chest. "I'll send flowers." "Marlo specifically asked if you'd attend," Quinlan added. "She said her grandmother talked about you often in those final weeks. Apparently, you made quite an impression." I thought about the letter, still tucked in my desk drawer, about a 97-year-old woman who'd seen past my scars and my revenge to something better underneath. "Clear my Friday afternoon," I said. "I'll be there." The funeral was held at an old stone church, the kind with Gothic arches and stained glass windows that cast colored light across the pews. I sat near the back, not wanting to intrude on family grief, and listened as people shared stories about Theodora's long and remarkable life. Marlo spoke last, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "My grandmother taught me that true grace comes from having power and choosing not to use it cruelly," she said, looking directly at me. "She taught me that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not an obligation you owe to others. And in her final weeks, she taught me that sometimes the people we least expect can show us the greatest kindness." After the service, I approached Marlo to offer my condolences. "She wrote to me," I said. "Your grandmother, on your wedding day, I wanted to thank you for that." "She insisted on writing it herself, even though her hands barely worked," Marlo replied. "She said you needed to know that someone saw who you really were." "She was right," I said quietly. "I did need to hear it." Marlo hugged me then, not the polite embrace of acquaintances, but the tight grip of someone who understood loss and gratitude in equal measure. The months that followed brought unexpected changes. My mother started seeing a therapist to work through what she called her toxic perfectionism. Dashiell and Marlo invited me to dinner regularly, and slowly, meal by meal, we began rebuilding something that felt like a sibling relationship. I threw myself into renovating the Meridian Estate, hearing the best craftspeople and restoration experts I could find. The electrical system was updated, the plumbing modernized, and the outbuildings restored to their former glory. I also made some additions: a wheelchair-accessible ramp to the chapel, improved lighting throughout the property, and a private suite where families could prepare for events without feeling rushed. 6 months after Dashiell's wedding, I hosted my first official event as the new owner, a fundraiser for the Burn Survivors Foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me, using the venue I'd almost weaponized for revenge to instead raise money for people dealing with the same challenges I'd faced. The event raised $300,000. My mother attended, along with Dashiell and Marlo. We took a family photo that night, the 4 of us on the estate's grand staircase, my scars clearly visible in the professional lighting. My mother had it framed and hung in her home office. "I want to see it every day," she told me when I asked why she'd put it in such a prominent place. "To remind myself of what really matters." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There were still awkward moments, still times when old hurts surfaced, but we were trying. All of us were trying. 1 year after the wedding, I stood in my corner office, looking out at the city skyline. The Meridian Estate had become one of the most sought-after venues in the region, booked solid for the next 18 months. Revengetancredi Holdings had acquired 2 more historic properties and was expanding into a full-fledged preservation and event management company. My phone buzzed with a text from Dashiell. "Marlo's pregnant. You're going to be an aunt. Please tell me you'll come to the baby shower." I smiled and typed back, "I'll be there, scars and all." Another text came through, this one from my mother. "Family dinner this Sunday. I'm cooking your favorite, assuming I can find that recipe your grandmother used to make." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I thought of Theodora Pemberton's letter, still in my desk drawer, and the line that had stuck with me. "Give them the chance to prove it." "I'll bring dessert," I typed back. My reflection looked back at me from the office window, the scar tissue on my neck and jaw visible even in the faint glass image. For a long time, I'd seen those scars as a mark of how my family had failed me. But maybe they were something else too, a reminder that I'd survived, that I'd chosen grace over cruelty, and that healing, both physical and emotional, was possible. I'd set out to destroy my brother's wedding as revenge for being excluded because of my appearance. Instead, I'd ended up with a successful business, a slowly mending family, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to choose forgiveness even when I had every right to choose otherwise. The scars were still there, they would always be there, but they no longer defined me. And that, I realized, was the real victory. 2 years after the wedding, I received an unexpected package at my office. Inside was a children's book, professionally illustrated and bound. The title read, "The Brave Lady Who Saved Me." The dedication page said, "For Miss Rowan who gave me my life back, with love, Philippa." I flipped through the pages with trembling hands. The story was simple but beautiful, a tale of a little girl trapped in a scary situation and a brave woman who rescued her despite the danger. The illustrations showed a woman with scars on her face and arms, drawn not as disfigurement, but as badges of courage. The final page showed the brave lady and the little girl together, holding hands, with text that read, "She saved me, and her bravery made her beautiful forever." A note fell out of the book, written in an adult's handwriting, Philippa's mother, Teresa. "Rowan, Philippa is 8 now, and she's been asking to write this story for over a year. She's in art class and worked with her teacher to illustrate it. She wanted you to have the first copy. She talks about you often and considers you her hero. We all do. Thank you for giving me my daughter back and for showing her what real courage looks like. Teresa." I sat at my desk, holding the book, and let myself cry. Not tears of sadness or anger, but of release. Of understanding that my worth wasn't determined by how my family had treated me or by what I looked like in photographs. It was determined by the choices I made, the lives I touched, and the grace I showed even when I was hurting. The phone rang. It was Quinlan. "Dashiell just called," they said. "He and Marlo want to book the Meridian Estate for their daughter's baptism. He asked specifically if you'd be willing to be the godmother." I looked at the children's book on my desk, at my reflection in the office window, at the framed photo of the Meridian Estate that now hung on my wall. "Tell him yes," I said. "I'd be honored." Because that's what grace looks like, showing up, even after you've been hurt, choosing connection over isolation, letting people prove they can be better. My family had failed me once, but I'd given them the chance to prove they could change, and they'd taken it. That didn't erase the past, but it created a different future, one where my scars were acknowledged but not defining, where my courage was celebrated, and where I was loved for exactly who I was. Sometimes revenge is getting everything you wanted, just not in the way you expected. I'd wanted them to see me, to acknowledge what they'd done, to understand the hurt they'd caused. And in the end, by choosing grace over cruelty, by giving back the venue instead of holding onto my anger, I'd gotten exactly that. The little girl I'd saved saw me as a hero. My family saw me as someone worthy of respect. And most importantly, I saw myself as someone strong enough to choose forgiveness without sacrificing my dignity. That was better than any revenge could ever be. 3 years after the wedding, the Meridian Estate hosted its most meaningful event yet. The grand opening of the Theodora Pemberton Wing, a new addition to the property designed specifically for accessibility. The wing featured state-of-the-art facilities for guests with disabilities, a sensory-friendly quiet room, and a gallery showcasing local artists, including several burn survivors whose art explored themes of trauma, recovery, and beauty. Marlo cut the ribbon alongside her daughter, 2-year-old Celeste, who clutched a stuffed bear in one hand and her mother's dress in the other. My mother stood beside me, her hand finding mine as we watched. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "Not just for this, but for everything, for being strong enough to make me face what I'd done, for giving us a chance to be better." "I'm proud of us," I corrected gently, "for doing the work to get here." Dashiell approached with Celeste in his arms. Someone wants her godmother, he said, passing the toddler to me. Celeste grabbed my face with both hands, her tiny fingers tracing the scar tissue on my jaw with innocent curiosity. Pretty, she declared solemnly. I laughed, tears pricking my eyes. Thank you, sweetheart. She's right, you know, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Philippa, now 10 years old, standing with her mother. She'd grown tall and confident, with none of the trauma I'd feared might haunt her from the accident. Miss Rowan, she squealed, running to hug me carefully because she still remembered I'd been hurt saving her. Look at you, I said, kneeling down to her level despite Celeste still in my arms. You've grown so much. I wrote another book, Philippa announced proudly. It's about choosing kindness even when you're angry. My teacher says it's very mature for my age. I met Teresa's eyes over her daughter's head. She smiled, and I smiled back, understanding passing between us. This child, this brave, creative, kind child, was alive because I'd made a split-second decision to run toward danger instead of away from it. That had cost me something. The scars, the pain, the months of recovery, the moment when my family's love proved conditional. But it had also given me something: purpose, strength, and the knowledge that I was capable of extraordinary courage. As the sun set over the Meridian Estate, I stood surrounded by family, biological and chosen, and realized that this was what redemption looked like. Not forgetting the hurt, but building something beautiful on top of it. Not erasing the scars, but learning to see them as part of the story rather than the whole story. I'd set out to punish my family for rejecting me. Instead, I'd built a business, restored a historic property, created spaces for celebration and healing, and given my family the chance to prove they could change. And they had changed. We all had. The scars on my face would never fade, but neither would the strength I'd discovered in choosing grace over revenge, forgiveness over bitterness, and hope over despair. In the end, that was the greatest revenge of all, becoming someone I was proud to be, scars and all.